And call upon the Prime Minister to debate to present a case in favor of the resolution. This House should support jury nullification.
Before I begin, just a couple of quick thank yous. I'd like to thank, on behalf of myself and Chad as well, Matt Stannard and Jason and Patty Steck for making this tournament possible, as well as the rest of the executive board, without whom none of us would be here enjoying Washington and all its beauty, as not to mention the great debating that's gone on so far. I'd also like to thank Jim Hansen for his very gracious hospitality up to this point. He's done an outstanding job, and I think he deserves a round of applause, please. And finally, I'd like to thank the English department as well as Dean Waggy for allowing us to be here, and both Steve Kaiser and Rachel Woodward for their participation and their help through everything that they've gone through, and especially Chad. He's the coolest. So, that said, ladies and gentlemen of the extensive gallery, this House should support jury nullification. I think this is an extremely timely resolution, so let's jump right into it. And I think that we've picked a resolution so unbelievably topical that we're not going to have to deal with any totality arguments. But in order to make that very clear, I'm going to define just a couple of key terms. This House, generally speaking, is going to be, we're talking about people in this room. What I want each and every one of you to do is to cast your ballot in favor of the government for one simple reason, and that is that in the scenario that we're going to paint you, in this day and time, in the context that we have, that we would support jury nullification. Specifically because we think that there is a problem within our legal system that jury nullification has a unique ability to counter in the status quo, and that is the 3 strikes and you're out law. And we think that this is extremely important. And looking at the criterion that we're going to look to today, we're going to look to the basic, classic, traditional definition of justice, that being given to each individual what they're due. And so the bulk of the debate is going to lie on who can better determine who better determines what is necessary to give people their due. Is it, do you better decide it by having a jury make the decision, or do you better decide it in the legislature at a higher level that's then handed down a particular sentence that's been mandated? So that's where we think that the bulk of the argumentation is going to lie. And looking at this, we're going to look to the first justification that we think is pretty important, that being the intent of the third strike, the third strike and you're out policy. My ASO point is that basically this was designed to reduce recidivism. We don't want people to continuously commit crimes because obviously that's bad for society, and I think we can all agree to that. So we figure if we threaten them with, well, if you do that just 1 or 2 more times, you're going to be put away indefinitely. And so the problem that we see with this, that I'll get into in just a moment as soon as I take Alan's question, is that it really hasn't had the effect that we thought it would have. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm curious, how many states currently, or the federal government currently utilize 3 strikes and you're out policies?
Right offhand, California is the major one that comes to mind, but I think in keeping with the fact that California is such, first of all, it tends to be one of the more progressive states, and so I think it's kind of a really bad indication that they've got this policy in effect. And so I think that even if it's only California, it's still a justifiable issue for us to be debating. Sure. The next thing that we can turn to is this idea that the bottom line is that we haven't seen the reduction in repeat crimes. What we have seen, I'll grant you, is that after people commit that second one and then they get convicted of a third and they get locked up for the rest of their lives, then you see a reduction. But you don't see that deterrence taking place between the first and second one. And that's the kinds of crimes that we're trying to prevent. And it simply isn't happening. So the bottom line is that without it's actually providing some kind of deterrent, it simply doesn't have a great deal of value in our system. And the final subpoint is that we likewise don't see a deterrent factor for children. The levels of juvenile crime have not gone down at all since the introduction of this law. And so what we have to recognize is that this is not providing for the deterrent factor that it was originally designed for. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. In the states that don't currently have 3-strike legislation, are the types of enforcement that they're using the criminal justice system having the kind of deterrent effect that 3 strikes does not have?
Some do, some don't. I mean, there are 1,000 different kinds of policies all across the United States. Some have been extremely effective, some have been extremely ineffective. The next point that we can turn to, the bottom line is that this one doesn't work, and that's the one we're debating. So the next thing that we can turn to is the second level of analysis, and that is what exactly is the duty of a jury in our justice system. Our ASO point is that bottom line, the duty of a jury is to dispense justice. And I think that we can all pretty much agree to that. That the whole reason you go before a jury and not just one random person is because you want that balance of people. You want to be in front of your peers. You want to have the opportunity for them to debate and ultimately to have to come up with a unanimous decision before anyone can throw your butt in jail. And I think that that's something that we can all pretty clearly see. The B subpoint is that what we also recognize in the criminal justice system is within the idea of the process is that up until that third issue, they get to take into account both act and intent in determining what kind of penalty will be imposed. If you did something wrong, but the intent really wasn't there, then you tend to get a lighter sentence. On the other hand, if you get into that third strike and you do something, they don't get to take into account what your intent was because there's a mandatory sentence in place, and so the intent becomes divorced from the action itself, and you don't get to take that into account. And Chad and I would contend that that's an extremely bad thing because one of the fundamental premises of our justice system, just look at the differences between murder and manslaughter and things like that, is that you have to look at the intent of what those people were trying to do when they committed the crime that they're being convicted of. The sub-point is that this also divorces the ability to consider all factors when making your decisions. Not only may you be convicted of a crime, not only are you getting a very stiff penalty perhaps for a crime that you didn't commit, you may also be getting a very stiff crime for a crime that you did intend to commit, but that really isn't a serious enough crime to warrant being locked away for the rest of your life. And we think that that's absolutely illegitimate and completely unfair, and that it absolutely violates justice in the sense that that individual is not given their due. In other words, that individual is not given the opportunity to have the full picture of that decision looked at before their sentence is handed down. And we think that that's necessarily bad. And that with jury nullification, we refuse to, I just realized why everyone looks confused, because I didn't define anything.
Yeah. Again, you're basically saying that if the jury knows this is somebody's third strike, they should just say, we're not going to convict you, or
Yeah, jury nullification is when a jury refuses to uphold a law. Like somebody comes up for conviction and they say to themselves, you know, this is just ridiculous, I refuse, on these grounds, I refuse to convict this person of this. And this is the situation that we're giving you in which the jury you should support jury nullification in a three-strikes you're out situation, because we recognize that it's a bad law, it's an unjust law, and so that's when the jury shouldn't do that. And I'm really sorry that I'm a complete idiot and completely forgot to say that at the beginning of this. So, finally, the D sub-point of this is that this also provides a check on the tyranny of the system. The entire point of having a jury is that you have the everyday person in there to make that decision. The people that you want to be in front of are your fellows, not some random person up on Capitol Hill who decides it's a really good idea to lock you away for the rest of your life without having a clue what it is that you actually did. And so what we recognize is that by providing that check on the system, we would support jury nullification when you're talking about three-strikes you're out policies. And the third level of analysis is this idea about the systemic problems that the three-strikes you're out policy creates in the system at hand. The A sub-point is the really obvious one, and that is prison overcrowding. That when you start throwing people into jail indefinitely, you wind up having the situations like prisons being overcrowded, and we think that that's a bad thing. The B sub-point is also one that's somewhat obvious, is the fact that our justice system, by many accounts, is inherently racist. That you have far, far more African Americans and other minorities in prison than you have white Americans, and we think that that's problematic as well, and that this only exacerbates that. The C sub-point is that this also completely undermines the legitimacy of any rehabilitation or criminal justice efforts, because from the minute you first are convicted of a crime, you are a criminal until the end of your life, because you have that three-strikes you're out hanging over your head. For all of these reasons, because it defies justice and because it fails to give the individual what he or she is due, I beg you to support jury nullification and propose today's resolution.